Welcome to Surviving the Black Church podcast, where we shed light and bring awareness to religious trauma and dismantle oppressive systems within the Black church.
On this week's episode, we continued the conversation from last week. Let's talk about religious trauma, part 1. In part 2, we began an in-depth conversation describing what religious abuse and religious trauma look like. We identified symptoms of trauma or soul loss within ourselves, as well as short and long-term effects of religious trauma. Most importantly, we encourage and uplift survivors of the Black church recovering from seasons of religious abuse and trauma. Please join us for the continuation of this important conversation. Let's talk about religious trauma, part 2.
The Surviving the Black Church podcast represents the views and opinions of Jonathon Carrington, Nikki G, Hugh Kelly, and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as clinical advice. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establishes a therapist-client relationship. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any clinical questions.
But yeah, and I think, just in expressing the positive effects, but also the negative effects of religion, we talked about today, religious trauma in regards to, it happening with all different types of groups. It happens in families, it happens in schools, it happens in workplaces, it happens everywhere. And religious institutions aren't exceptional in this sense. And so that's what we've been talking about in raising awareness around religious trauma. We talked a little bit about just, religion and the stigmas attached to mental health. Because, many people have been told to, pray it away to resolve the problem, even though the problem is still there. And viewing, serious emotional difficulties and challenges as even just wages of sin, or people who manifest psychiatric symptoms, being possessed by a demon or the devil, or using words to describe things that are human, that are part of our human experience. And it usually is particularly those who are engaging in antisocial or narcissistic behaviors. But are we labeling it that, or are we labeling it as, demonic or some other word, possession or whatever? And we could talk more about that in future episodes. And even just like talking about this, some of the negative impacts of religion in terms of the religious psychosis. When people that are in leadership or in power have these beliefs that they're receiving some type of direct communication from a God or their God in forms of voices, in forms of visions. And that's another topic for another episode. And now we're going to move into talking about, religious or spiritual abuse, where religion is being used as a mechanism or a tool in order to manipulate, in order to control, in order to coerce people, in order to abuse people. And, we will be talking about church hurt and the difference between church hurt and religious trauma, because, church hurt is not religious trauma. And I hope that we can process that as well. So I wanted to kind of talk about religious trauma and religious abuse. And Nikki, help me with this, because I want to kind of process a little bit about religious trauma versus religious abuse, so that we're not getting those two words confused.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because religious trauma is when individual, when their religious experiences, they're abusive, they're dangerous, they're damaging, they're stressful, and some of these traumatic experiences are harming them physically, emotionally, mentally, sexually, spiritually, psychologically. It's impeding their safety, it's impeding their health. And so right now, I feel like religious trauma, because religious trauma has multiple layers and multiple levels. And I
Yes,
think
it's very
right now,
complex.
what was that, Nikki?
It's very complex.
It's
Mm-hmm.
very, very complex. And we need to treat it as such. But right now in the culture, I feel like from my lens, I feel like religious trauma is being discussed when certain identities are being marginalized or oppressed
Yes.
or
Yes.
discriminated against or actively shunned or banned from the faith or their religious community. And so right now, that's how I feel like now, in terms of where we are as, in our understanding of trauma and religious trauma, I think it will in the future go a little bit deeper as we become more conscious of what it is that we're experiencing. But I feel like it's, when we hear some of the stories and experiences of people who are kind of saying, I've been hurt or I've been abused or I've been neglected, I think that's where we're at right now. But I think it's going to continue to go deeper and deeper as we as Black people become more aware of ourselves and our mental health, our emotional health, and as more research is being developed and all of that. It's all of this is going to help it to develop some legs for it to stand on. But yeah, so right now it's more identity based, and it's based on the religious trauma is based on following factors such as gender identity or gender expression, sexual identity, racial identity, ethnicity, disability, whether you have a chronic medical condition, occupation, socioeconomic status, your marital status, relationship status, your ability to have children, immigrant experiences, your immigrant status, your nationality, your mental health history, and or if there's any other traumas such as abuse or assault. So I'm going to pause there, let that breathe a little bit, and what do you all make of that? And I hope that we can kind of segue more into like religious trauma. I mean, religious abuse, and really have a back and forth on that. What do you think?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about some of the areas of vulnerability for people to experience, religious abuse and deal with religious trauma. And, it's so true, especially within, just looking at it on the Black community, standpoint, our age, young people are very impressionable. So, we want to have impact. We want to feel like we belong, so sometimes you're youth, sometimes when you're older, sometimes if you have the loss of some loss of loved ones or things of that nature, or just lost your job or just feeling very despondent and dealing with life hardships. These are some areas where we're more vulnerable to experience religious abuse and religious trauma. And so thank you for listing some of those out, because there are some susceptibilities that I think if we are a little bit more aware of, I know for one, when I know that I've gone through a lot of just changing of relationship dynamics, or, it's just been really heavy with life's blows. I'm very intentional to be aware of my connections, whether it's spiritual, whether it's new relationships or taking a new job. I'm more aware of, okay, my volume level is a little bit high with needing to connect with people because of what I've been through. So let me be a little bit more alert and discerning with who I connect with. And sometimes we don't do that because we're not aware. So thank you for giving us some of these areas where we could be vulnerable to experience religious abuse and trauma.
Absolutely. Hugh, any
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. I think another thing about um is just like naming it as this. Once we get down into the
Yes.
nitty gritty, like but I know for myself, I was saying earlier, like it took me years to go, oh, this is not good for me. This is actually bad. Like,
Right, right.
so I think being able to name this kind of trauma
Mm-hmm.
as a trauma and then
Mm-hmm.
and as abusive, before getting into the differences, is probably something, because it's so difficult to take off that you know to be able to sit with your fragility in that sense, and being able to kind of understand that you're not it's not something that you're causing. It's something that's it's not something that you're causing, and it's also something that's actually happening, and it's like, a lot of times people just go, let's call things what the fuck they are, so let's call these things what the fuck they are, and call a spade a spade. And so just even naming it is, I think, going to be a huge, yeah, I'm going to say challenge, but also it's going to be a huge step in a direction towards healing for a lot of individuals. I know it was for me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is definitely important to provide the descriptive language and naming the experiences as they are occurring in the environment. Um, what I wanted to do now is I wanted to present an example of a situation where it could be deemed as religious trauma. And I want us to kind of help the audience to identify um, what part of it is religious trauma and what is it that is religious abuse and why? Because I think it will be helpful for us to kind of say, okay, that's religious trauma. This is religious abuse that happened to the person. And before I go into this, I want to give a trigger warning. If this is triggering, if you need to mute or if you need to just step away from this audio, stop the audio, because I really, whatever I'm going to share right now might be a little activating, but it will help to provide more context and more information for us as we process this, so that we can kind of be able to name and identify when experiences are occurring in our communities, in our environments. And so what I want to do is I want to share a situation. It'll be brief, but it would be the church member. It will be a female church member of a church, and she experienced sexual assault by a religious leader. The church member, she experienced the sexual assault, but she's also feeling this sense of undue pressure from her faith community to work harder in the church, to make some unwise compromises in her community, and also to tolerate the abuse that is still occurring while she's in this community. Um, Now, this same female church member was also told that um, if she does talk about this, she believes that her standing in the faith community or religious community or her relationship with God would be at stake. Um, in the same experience, the religious leaders in the community deny and ignore any reports that she makes of any physical or sexual or emotional or spiritual abuse. Um, and as a result, she's shunned, she's ostracized. Um, and the people, she said in the same token that she was told uh, that she deserved how she was treated by the religious leader. It was decreed by um, the God that they believe in as a necessary act. And it actually was not as bad as it was in the grand scheme of things. The church member or the victim at this point, she avoids and she represses sharing her thoughts or her feelings or her experiences about what happened out of the fear of what it could mean for her position or her place in the church, or even just the place that she holds in the church in terms of what role she's playing out in the church. Some of what she experiences is post-sex guilt, decreased sense of self-worth, sexual compulsivity to cope, self-sabotaging relationships. She experiences nightmares, sleeping issues, eating issues, anxiety, depression, grief, and loneliness. So I'm going to pause there. I've just given you guys a lot to chew on, but what do you think about her story? What part of that was religious trauma, and what if that was religious abuse?
I thought the sexual assault was religious abuse, and then the shockwave, or like the ripple effect that was happening afterwards, the shaming, the blaming, the denying that happened to her was a religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely was, the abusive part, the sexual assault rather. And even the pressure to stay, the pressure to conform, and pretend like nothing happened. But the traumatic effects, in her physical body, those are the after effects, and this is why, we're talking about that so we can distinguish between the two. And I think this was a perfect example, Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was because that helped me really clarify, the long-term ripple of the chronicness of
Yes.
was really felt also traumatic. Like that was the after the sexual assault itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that also felt very traumatic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just yes, the sexual assault was the abuse that happened. The sexual assault by a religious leader was the religious abuse. Also, religious abuse was feeling pressure from the church to tolerate the abuse, to ignore or deny the reports of the abuse, and even just being ostracized and separated was a form of religious abuse.
I would say saying she deserved it, or I don't, maybe I was hearing things, but did you say they said she also, like, she was to blame for it as well?
Yes, she was to blame, shifting blame to the victim, or shifting blame to her as if the experience was it was her fault, and that it was actually an act of God that this happened, and that it was not as bad as she kind of framed it to be, in the scheme of things, and that is a form of religious abuse.
Yeah, you're invalidating her experience.
Invalidating her experience, dismissing her experience, denying, ignoring, all of that is abuse, religious abuse. Now, when it comes to religious trauma, when she experienced that traumatic event or that incident, she avoided it. That's trauma. That's religious trauma. She avoided and repressing the fact that this was an experience that happened to her in this environment. She kept the feelings bottled up inside. There was a fear-based response as well, because she had anxiety and fear of okay, is this going to affect my position in the church? That's also religious trauma. How are people going to perceive me if I do tell this truth? That's religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then she experienced even just after the event, which is like feeling guilty about, her sexual experience, sexual trauma, religious trauma, sexual trauma. Just with, the nightmares and the sleeping issues, the eating disordered behaviors, anxiety, depression, and grief and loneliness. She had after effects after this religious traumatic event happened, by a religious leader, because she was not effectively able to process what happened to her,
Right.
what happened to her by this particular authority. And she's still in this church. So that can help us to understand, like, okay, this was the situation that occurred. And I just want to just be able to kind of go more into like how religious trauma isn't always associated with like specific events. It can happen on a long term, a long duration of time, through the harmful thinking, through the harmful behaviors that are inflicted by the faith or the religious community. Oftentimes, when you think about the LGBTQ population, which is another topic that I really wanted to touch on because we don't really hear too much about the religious trauma and that aspect of it, because oftentimes there are members of the LGBTQ plus community, and they grow up in these fundamentalist religious communities with this belief system that their identity is sinful, or that it's evil, or that they're demonically possessed, or that there is a certain spirit that has overcome their body, or there's a certain demon that has overcome them. And that's a form of identity-based religious trauma that has you thinking that your belief system, that this identity that you have close to you is putting you at risk to yourself, the relationship, putting this relationship at risk to yourself, putting you at risk to your family, putting you at risk to your God, and putting your own community at risk. And so religious trauma can happen in anyone, in everyone. And even just with just making the decision to leave the church, like we was talking about earlier, that's religious trauma. To be able to leave the church and to leave this space that has perpetuated the harm and abuse. And even though it's a healthy response and choice to make, to be able to recover yourself and to heal from it, it can also feel a bit disorienting, because your entire life has been controlled by certain types of belief systems, rules, and expectations. And so it can lead to just damaged relationships. It can lead to self-sabotaging relationships. It can lead to all these different things. And so that's why it's just important for us to really talk about this in this context. Any other thoughts on what's been shared so far?
That example of the woman who was, sexually assaulted, even though it's a hypothetical and it's an example, there are many women out there that this is your true experience. And you might have gone through this and you've left that church, but nobody knows. And, you've dealt with that silent pain, and you've wrestled in your mind with, did I actually invoke this? Is it my fault? Maybe, I wasn't as godly as I should have been. There's so many different thoughts that have been ruminating for years with that experience and that assault. And again, I know Jonathon gave a hypothetical, but that has been your reality. And I have not been able to make sense. And just like we talked about the long-term effects of a survivor of religious abuse and the traumatic effects that are long-term, it's been years since this happened. And you still feel like perhaps it was your fault. Sometimes you weigh, should you have stayed and made the devil out of a liar? Should you have stayed to show that, um, you are still a part of God's army? Should you have, perhaps said something, or maybe you feel like you know that this was wrong and maybe you should have spoke up. Maybe you should have maybe gone in front of the church, if you will, to speak up so someone can hear what happened to you. And I'm so sorry if this has truly been your personal experience. And there are many, many, many women and men where the leader has taken their role and their position and they've used the power dynamics for their advantage. And this is what we're describing as religious abuse. They have taken their position of power and they have leveraged it, and they have called a young 20-year-old into their office, a young 30-year-old who have been under their tutelage to learn the things of the faith and perhaps be a pastor in the future. And this has been your experience. And I am so sorry. But I hope what we're talking about is giving you language and giving you context for what you've experienced, and to know it's not your fault. We hear you, we see you, and we realize that this is a problem within the church community, and even more so within the Black church community. The place that used to be a place of refuge and community for us as a people, when we've come out of slavery and found a way to continue on, has now been a place where abuse and harm and assault has been taking place for so many out there. And just want to take a moment and acknowledge you. If you're driving in your car, you're washing the dishes, you're running errands, and you hear this and you thought nobody knew, well, we're saying we know this has happened, and we're so sorry. And we're hoping that you'll be able to get the understanding that you need. You'll be able to get the help that you need. We're going to continue to unpack this and give resource and give, hey, what do you do? What can you do? How can you come back home to yourself and find that peace and find that recovery from such type of abusive experiences? And there may be some out there that say, hey, I didn't experience it sexually, but I experienced, a leader in the church who used scriptures to manipulate me and to make me feel like I was less than, who got very invasive in my personal life, even down to who I should marry or what career I should choose, because they considered themselves my spiritual parents. And if you're out there and you experience this and you feel like this is not right, we hear you too. And we're here to say that these are abusive practices at the hands of leaders who are supposed to be leading people to God and to themselves. Instead, they're using their position to hurt and abuse. And so those who have been through those type of things, there's the traumatic effects. There is the residual effects afterwards. And I'm going to pass the mic back to Jonathon to kind of describe, what a person may be going through if that's their experience, if they've experienced the abuse. Because I think even within the Black church, there's this stigma of, okay, baby, you went through a little bit of, an issue in the church, or, something happened. You went through a little church hurt, and we'll talk more about that in our next episode. You should be all right. You should be able to pray through it. Why are you still dealing with depression? Why are you still dealing with shame and guilt? Why do you feel like you can't go back to the church anymore? We want to unpack that and show what the effects of that abuse and trauma look like. So, but I just wanted to pause and just acknowledge you and say, we see you, you matter, and we're rooting for you.
Yes, absolutely. We are rooting for you. And I know that some of this content may be very difficult for many to hear, and it can ideally, what we're talking about in terms of just this idea of rebuilding and struggling with with what the sense of autonomy and making your own decisions, and also just having difficulties with just leaving these type of communities and experiencing this sense of loneliness and this isolation that can be felt as a result of coming into terms with the reality and the truth of what it was that you experienced. And it can feel intimidating. It can feel like, the people that were that you trusted and that you can confide on and that you believed in, and that you were told these different things, and now being told that what you have been taught and what you've been told is actually may not be true, or may not be what you thought that it was. And I know that experience can be really troubling and disorienting. And also to deal with the fact that even me, speaking to an audience that might be still in the faith or might be still in the religion, and this belief that I might be, a reprobate, or might be an apostate, have an apostasy, or maybe evil or inferior by even, kind of talking about or bringing light to these issues. I want to invite that, and I want to acknowledge and validate that might be an experience that you're having as well. Because that is very real. If you're listening to me and thinking, he stepped away, or he decided to go in a different direction, or he decided to leave the fold and go off on a different path, and he's following Satan, or he's following the devil now, and all these other thoughts, right, that might form because I am bringing awareness and attention to this very issue. I welcome all of it, because you know what it means, because it's because it's real, and this is an experience. And so, and I think that before I get into like how do we what do we do, or how do we cope with this, I want to just talk about, like, go back to a little bit. And I know, in this idea of the purity culture, which is something that we do need to talk about, because of the, you mentioned about marriage, and there is this concept in many religions, that do focus on this ideology around marriage, around procreation, around virginity, around sexuality, around sexual identity, around gender. And there is an overemphasis and a heavy focus on it. And it's this need to really control and scrutinize and monitor and evaluate the way in which human beings socialize, how they interact, how they engage with each other, how they relate to each other, and creating this separation between us versus them. You know, we're the good people, they're the evil people, based upon the beliefs, the scriptures, the institution. And in the context, there isn't a space where people who are marginalized and oppressed, in particular, might have a chance to really experience things like social milestones, like developmental milestones, such as being able to have first dates or kisses, or until you reach adulthood, or even having sex until adulthood. And these delays can be very frustrated. People are frustrated by that. And just having just very restrictive, very controlling lifestyles, it can lead to impulsive behaviors, reckless decisions as adults once they leave these religious communities. So I wanted to highlight that, and just the overwhelming dysfunction of sexuality when it comes to purity culture, in terms of people who are trying to remain abstinent until marriage, and this idea of just feeling dirty or guilty for having sex, and just struggling with just, how am I supposed to be? How am I supposed to show up as a human being? It's just really, really difficult and very hard, but it all leads to this sense of religious trauma that can really prevent us from living a healthy, a fulfilling, a creative existence on the planet by trying to maintain all of these type of isms and stigmas and, archetypes and all these different things. And it's more of like, well, how do we get to the place where we can start engaging in self-care? And I want to entertain everyone on this dialogue, because I don't think we all have the answers to this question. But in that, the steps really is about coming into contact with the information, coming into knowledge about what it is that we're experiencing, whether it be symptoms of trauma or whether it be abuse, but for us to have more conversations and more dialogue around these topics. And really identifying with the parts of ourselves that are disconnected and lost, because that's what typically happens with trauma. We are disconnected from our sense of self. And I think partially it's about information and educating ourselves on what's happening to us, what's happening within us. Because, with trauma, the memories and parts of our life we have dissociated from a lot of these experiences. We might experience episodes of depression as a result of these traumas. We might feel like parts of ourselves are missing or broken or fragmented. You might be experiencing, numbness emotionally in your life. You might have these feelings of anxiety or fear. You might just experience like you don't know where you're going to go. You feel like you're defeated in life. You have no direction. And those are some of the things that just bringing awareness, bringing the things that are out of the unconscious and into consciousness will help you to become more healthier on your road to recovery and healing, even though it may not feel like that's the direction.
Yeah.
But that is the road to recovery. That's the road to healing. And being in community with people who are also becoming more informed and educated on trauma, abuse, religious trauma, religious abuse, the things that we're talking about is to educate yourself, is to become more aware. What do you think, Nikki and Hugh, on
would it be okay if I can just share a couple of things as far as for those who say, okay, I heard the example that you gave about a religious abuse, but that may not pertain to them, but just some of the things of what it looks like if you're going through religious abuse, or is often termed spiritual abuse. And within the Black church context, you might be more familiar with that verbiage, spiritual abuse. But like some of the things that you would perhaps see if, you were going through religious abuse and weren't aware of it, because I heard Hugh talk about like he's just realizing some of this recently, and I heard you talk about when you realize the lie, and sometimes the hardest part in seeing is identifying and really understanding what we experience, and it helps give us context. So just to, share a couple of things, like if you're in an environment, particularly in a church environment, and particularly in a Black church environment, and you often feel very pressured, obligated, or coerced to do things against your will, you often feel very guilty afterwards. You sometimes feel very fearful if you don't obey the leader's wishes. A lot of times the abusive leader, he or she will take biblical scriptures and tenets of the faith, acts of worship, and they pervert it and they twist it to continue to be able to manipulate you and to gaslight you, to coerce you, to adhere to what the leaders or the church needs and desires are. Sometimes you feel like, what I'm experiencing is just not right. I mean, I'm reading these scriptures, but God is love, but how come I'm feeling judgment and shame and guilt when I'm in church versus when I'm outside of church? A lot of times you may feel like your personal life is being controlled. and your personal autonomy, your individuality is being eroded. You're more forced to think like the rest of the group as opposed to having your own personal philosophy or ideology about something. You may feel like, I feel stuck here. I want to leave, but I don't know how to leave because I'm weary. I'm exhausted from experiencing all of these different things that I just mentioned. You feel chaos. You feel stressed. You feel exhausted and burnt out. You're attending the church, but you feel afraid to leave. And the leaders have made you believe that there is no other church like the one you are attending. And that the leadership, God has truly anointed them from on high, and that their leadership is basically synonymous with God's leadership. So to disobey your leader is ultimately like disobeying God. If you have questions, critiques about the leader's actions or their guidance, you're ridiculed, you're shamed. Sometimes you are publicly humiliated to be made an example of, so the rest of the community in the church will know not to do that. There are a lot of rigid rules. Some are spoken, a lot are unspoken, and you're expected to follow. And if you do not, then there will be some scripture that'll be used to make you feel like you've missed the mark and that you are not obeying the leader, and ultimately you are not obeying God. And then for the ones who are being obedient to everything the leader asks, they are praised, they are promoted. If the leader asks you to do something and you can't because you have to take care of your family, you have to take care of your kids, then you are ultimately, eventually you'll be demoted. You'll be cast aside. The leader will cease asking for you to do things in the church. And so then the fear of missing out, the fear of not being a part of the community and belonging on a deeper level starts to hit you. A lot of emphasis on spiritual warfare. If you bring something up, if you start to realize something's not right, and ultimately it's probably abuse, but you may not understand that that's what it is. And you bring it up to the leadership, you bring it up to your family, people who attend the church, they will just label it as, you're in spiritual warfare, that the enemy is trying to take ground in your mind, in your heart. That is pastor, that is apostle, that is, prophet so-and-so. You can't question the man or the woman of God. And so you're feeling disoriented because you know what you felt, you know what you experienced, but other people are just labeling it as spiritual warfare or labeling it as you not being, deep enough in God. These are just some of the exhaustive list of examples of what it looks like to be in an environment where there is a lot of spiritual abuse. There's an invisible hierarchy. The more you do what the leader wants, the more you do what the pastor wants, by any means necessary, the higher you will be. And then there's this hierarchy dynamic where those who don't are at the bottom and are at the back and are not called upon. And, there is a pitting against each other with the membership, where the ones who are closer to the leadership, they start to tell on the other members so that they can continue to keep their place. And the ones who are further away from the leadership, then they want to tell on someone else so that they can get closer to the leader. And so they will use prophecies and dreams and visions and prophetic words in front of the church to get you to obey what they want. And they will use prayers and prophecy to humiliate you and to get you to be feeling ridiculed and shamed and controlled. And so people who are in a church environment where a lot of this is going on, there's an exploitation of your labor, your time, your finances. There's an exploitation of the scripture. When people are experiencing this, there is a lot of trauma that you feel. And if you feel compelled to stay at this church and in this environment, it's hard to find people who understand and can give language. And this is why we're doing this podcast. But these are some of examples of what the religious abuse, what it looks like actually in that environment. And so some of the effects that Jonathon was just speaking of, these are the preceding things that come before the traumatic effects. So I just want to give a little bit more context for those who are saying, okay, I still want to know more. What does religious abuse look like? But then the religious trauma, it affects the whole entirety of the person. Emotionally, it affects you. Psychologically, it affects you. Socially, it affects you. Physically, it can affect you. And I can go on into more detail, but I'll just pause right there and let Hugh or Jonathon add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and I almost think these are like topics for other episodes as well. Like the sexual, like the purity culture, and even I think the exploitation is another, like how that plays out. And so I think that we really, I just hope the audience is listening and be able to digest what we're saying. I know it's a lot of stuff that we are putting out there, and that we're asking you to sit with and just think about and process what's going on in your body. I want you to be mindful of actually what's going on in your body. I just want to throw that out there, and to just if you were listening and you need to just be able to process it. And so, yeah, I mean, I know trauma is not easily digestible. So I want to make sure that, we're giving you space to breathe. We're giving you space to think and feel. And we're giving you space to kind of come to, and I don't mean like come to necessarily like an aha moment, but more so like coming to a place of almost stillness, I want to say, with your experiences. If anything that we've talked about today is resonating with you, I want you to be able to just understand that is all, they are all valid. And we really appreciate that you have come on this journey with us. And so thank you so much for listening. I really, because trauma is so, it's all encompassing. And so I'm just happy that you're here with us. So that's what I wanted to say.
Awesome. Awesome. So now that we've really just processed all this information for the audience, and we've been going for some time talking about trauma, which is an extensive topic, and it can be a lot because trauma can be never ending for some people. I just want to just shift into this orientation of coming back to our resources now in regards to like, finding a space where we can really kind of move away. And, so I encourage, if you're listening to this right now, to take a couple of deep breaths, and just bring yourself back to the present. And just know that religious trauma, what we've discussed today, it can have an astronomical impact on one's mental health. And if you were the one that grew up where you felt like you went through some of these experiences, and it may mean that you want to know more, you want to get more answers, you want more information about it, but just know that your experiences are definitely common. It is not unique. There are more people who have experienced what you have experienced, and religious trauma is a thing. And I think that it is very important for us to recognize that it has occurred, it is occurring. And I know that it's easy to make excuses or think that things were different. But just in recognizing that, coming to a recognition that while the people that were leaders, whether they be your parents or whether they be clergy members, they may have had good intentions, but if they engaged in abuse, they were misguided. And that led you to experiencing harm. That's one way to cope. To continue to educate yourself on this particular topic around religious trauma, but also finding examples of people that are in your life and your community that are doing good work, that are really caring and that are empathetic and that are supportive, and may not have religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. And to be able to come to the place where you can start developing the values or the things that are really important to you, that you find to be important to you. Also, identifying values that are connected to your religion or your religious belief or your spiritual beliefs to help you to stay anchored and to help you to stay grounded in the real reasons of why you are where you are. And also to be able to get connected, get to know people that are outside of these religious communities where harm is being perpetuated, where abuse is being perpetuated. If that is something that is accessible to you, to find ways to cope, to find that sense of belonging, to get connected, some of the positive benefits of your belief system or your religious values, and to find people, to be in community with people that share similar struggles and experiences. Or maybe you want to just kind of, just think about what we're just talking about and explore what is it that you believe in and why do you believe it? Taking some inventory about the ways in which you have been taught to believe as a human being and what you know to be true. And that it's okay to, identify those areas where you might feel like you're not certain or you're not really sure about, and you would like to do a little bit more exploration. Also, just being intentional about creating a life for yourself.
Yes.
And experiences for yourself that are happy, that are good, or even just experiences of just love and support. How are you creating these experiences for yourself? If you can, do things like creating a bucket list or a list of things that you want to do that are going to just make you fulfilled or happy or satisfied. How do you identify the ways in which you're developing this sense of like what to look forward to or hopes for your future or just the desires, the dreams that you want to have for yourself? And if what we're doing is we have a group on Facebook, and the group is a space where people are coming together and they're connecting, and they're what we will hope to do is that they connect and bond and relate people who have had experiences with religious trauma, religious abuse, and who've been able to survive from those experiences and to be able to, tell their stories, to talk about what it is that they went through, to put a name to their experiences, and to be in community with other people to share what they've experienced and their struggles. And that helps people know that they're not alone. That helps people to know that they are not going through this battle by themselves, that there are other people that are in this world that are going through this.
Yes.
We need to start doing that. We need to start building communities of people who have survived these adverse religious experiences, who have survived religious trauma. As we come to learn more about the deleterious effects of religious trauma in the lives of people, and it's becoming a problem. It's becoming a much more pervasive and universal topic to talk about, and it will be in the future as we become more informed and educated about this. And so as you work through your healing as you work through your issues related to religious trauma, is to remember that you are not, and that you will never be, alone in your pain, in your suffering, in your misery, in your experiences. You are not alone. You are not alone, even if that is a feeling that you feel. You are not alone. And that hearing that I am not alone, that there are other people that are out there that have similar struggles and similar experiences, will help you to feel like you can use your experiences as a way to overcome them, but also develop that sense of resiliency and strength that, yeah, I experienced this, and it was painful, it was life-shattering, it was devastating, but I'm not my trauma. It's only I am not my trauma, and I have the strength, I have the coping skills, I have my voice, that I can use my voice to express what it is that I have been through, what it is that I have overcome, and I'm still overcoming it, and that I can overcome my past, and that I can move through it, but I'm not my trauma. So I leave you on that note, and that, yes, I know that the process of receiving this information, of enduring the abuse and the trauma, of going through the process of leaving these adverse religious experiences, it could be very complicated, it could be very confusing, it could be very conflicting, and that it can create feelings of doubt of yourself, that you're even listening to this content, am I doing the right thing? But we are just providing what is needed, the information about this topic, in order to help you to reconnect back to yourself, reconnect back to your sense of self, your sense of autonomy, your sense of agency, to provide messages, information about your reality, your lived experience, and then helping you to transition into spaces and environments that feel resourced, to feel safe, of those who have had similar experiences. And even if there is a need for professional support to work through those experiences, that can help you, whether it be a coach or a therapist or whoever, to help you to process these experiences. And that alone will help you to make the necessary decisions, the necessary steps for your own mental health, for your emotional health, for your mental well-being and emotional well-being. And then you're working towards creating this life, this new future that you can establish and set up for yourself. Okay, so we're going to land there. Did anyone else have any closing remarks before we close this episode?
I just want to echo a lot of what you said in saying that it's okay to focus on you. I know that if you are a survivor of religious abuse and religious trauma, and a lot of things that you might have been taught in the spaces that you were in, is to take care of everyone else, leadership, church responsibilities, everyone else besides you. And when you've been through abuse and you've been through trauma, sometimes it's hard to turn and look at ourselves and start to focus on ourselves and to do some of the things Jonathon said, and, enjoying certain things, getting out, connecting back with ourselves. But I just want to echo what you said and say, it's okay to focus on you. You are not your trauma, and healing is possible as you turn inward. It is not demonic. It's not selfish. I could quote a scripture that actually justifies this for those who are wanting scripture, but check out Matthew 22:36-40 for those who actually need a scripture. When, it said that loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, that's the first commandment, and loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And for many, I know myself as a religious trauma survivor, I focused on loving God and I focused on loving others, but I forgot about me. Somehow in all those spaces, Nikki was being erased and I didn't even know it. I didn't even know I wasn't connected to myself. And so healing and recovering after a lot of what I've been through, I found that coming back to myself, acknowledging my needs, taking care of me, it's okay. So I just want to encourage you with that continue on the journey and listen to future episodes. We will be speaking a lot more about these topics about, surviving the Black church, but also as a survivor, how you build yourself up, how you turn the page, how you work towards moving on that road of recovery. So again, like I said earlier, we see you, we acknowledge you. We say your experiences are real, and this is a place where you can just continue to learn through conversation with Hugh, myself, and Jonathan. And hopefully you'll connect with us in the Facebook group in the future. Thanks so much for listening.
Great, Nikki. Hugh, do you have any closing remarks? Anything you want to share before we wrap up today?
Yes. I just wanted to say, like, I wanted to add a lot onto what Nikki just said about coming back to yourself and your own, coming back to who you are, and being able to have clarity in that, and being able to have joy in that, and being able to thrive in that, and being able to create real communities, real, tangible, sustainable, loving, joyful, reciprocal places that you can honestly feel proud to be a part of in this life. So that's what we are. It's that's when that's if there's anything that I left you here with today, it's that I'm just, I want you to come back to yourself as well. I want you to be able to enjoy that and be able to, thrive in spirit, whatever that might mean for you, in a way that is building a way that is not anti-life, that is very building upon actual life. So that's all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lightning podcast and a very thorough presentation. And I welcome you all to keep coming back and keep listening and keep working at it. It's the healing process can be beautiful, but it also can be very messy and complicated. But we take all of it in stride. And so thank you all, Hugh, Nikki, for your contribution, for your service to this podcast, to this episode. And yeah, we'll just keep going. And so we're going to end here. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to Surviving the Black Church podcast with your hosts, Jonathan, Nikki, and Hugh. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Until next time, take care.